All right, so let me tell you how this class started, and then it may help understand where we're going. We've been having a bunch of different classes. We started 5 years ago with a class on understanding the Bible and the framework and its creation of that. And then we've kind of journeyed all around, and we did our last class was a construct of what does it mean to do evangelism in a way that's different. And then before that, we looked at theories of atonement, which some of you in this classroom have said, please let it be not like that. Because it was a lot, right? We looked at these kind of very complex ideas. And it was beautiful and hard too, right? So in the scope of that, one of the questions that has arisen is, where are we headed? Like, why are you bringing this stuff up? As if I had a plan. I'm just talking about things that I love and inviting you to talk about them with me. But I do think one of the things that happens in our faith is we move. And we are in a place, right? We're moving from somewhere to somewhere. And so that's what started this journey of thought for me over the last 3 or 4 months. That's a fun noise. Is where are some of the places we're moving? Where have we come from and where are we going? And that will be, do you know what that is? It feels like an alien behind me. I'm like, I usually can ignore things. That I can't ignore. But the interesting piece, right, is that we're not all from the same place. And we're not all moving to the same place. So what does it look like to be a community, radically committed to each other, who are from different places and going to different places? And where are we going, some of us together? And how do we build community around some of those things? And also, how do we not look at our neighbor who's in a similar journey, headed maybe in a little bit different place, and not be like, man, they're weird. And I had the most beautiful experience of this. Last week, Jason and I went to a youth pastors conference in Atlanta, and it's run by an organization called 10 by 10, and the idea of 10 by 10 is that they want 10 million students to grow deeper in their faith over the next 10 years. But in this room were Catholics and Methodists and Episcopals and Presbyterians and Pentecostals and non-denominational and Baptists. There were people wearing shirts that God's pronouns are they, them, theirs, and people who were anti-LGBTQ in a room trying to figure out how do we do this meaningful work together. And it was hard, and it was different, and it was beautiful. And so these spaces are real. They matter. We grow because of each other. And so that's kind of the conversation that we're going to be engaging in. Tonight, my hope is to learn how to use this. There we go. My hope is that we kind of underlay why this matters. So kind of giving a theology of movement. And then we're going to be talking about 3 migrations that happen in the life of faith. The first one is a spiritual migration. We'll talk about what that means next week. And then we're going to talk about theological migration. And these aren't singular, they're plural. So multiple theological migrations, multiple spiritual migrations, and multiple missional migrations that happen. They're ways that we go from someplace to someplace new. And so that's what we're going to be engaging in. This system is a system that I'm borrowing from Brian McLaren. And there's 2 chapter sets for you to take home. If you want to read and go a little deeper from the things that we're talking about each week, I'll have these. I also will be bringing a reading list each week. So if you're just like, man, I want to go deeper in some of these thoughts, here are all the books that you can order off Amazon and play with that, and here are all the podcasts that you can do, and so you'll have all of that. And so the two books that I'm kind of centering in from tonight are The Great Spiritual Migration by Brian McLaren, and I don't use his concepts, I just steal his outline. I just have stole spiritual, theological, missional, because I think it's a really good way to talk about these things, that our faith is complex and it has different elements, and these are the elements we're going to look at because we only have 4 weeks. How do we do that in this space? And then the second book is a book that came out this last year called Red Skies, and it was, every chapter has a different author, and it talks about kind of the changing realities that the church is facing, and what do we do that? And each of those authors also come from very diverse backgrounds. And so these are two of the reasons I'm going to play with tonight. There's about 10 other authors that I'll talk about tonight, but some of them, off of our last book, one of the things I heard from people was, that's too heavy to read for me. And so I've tried to pick some things that are a little bit more just approachable in the beginning. And if you don't feel that's true, please let me know, because I'm not always good at that, right? And there's a ton of books out there. I can keep pulling once until we get the right one. So any questions about that so far? That's where we're headed. That's what we're doing. All right. Welcome. And I'm using a new system on the iPad, so it may be a little cumbersome. So there is an ancient story about a people that are on the move. They had been enslaved, confined, told the world was small and predictable, and that their lives would always be the same. Then one night, under the cover of darkness, they slipped into the wilderness with nothing but a promise to go on. They didn't know where they were headed or what waited for them on the other side of the darkness. They only knew that to stay was death, and that to move on might be a chance for life. The people of God, right, have always been a migrating people. From Abraham stepping out of Ur into the unknown, to Moses leading the Israelites through the desert, to Mary saying yes to the Spirit's invitation to carry itself, every major act of faith has been an act of motion, of movement. Something shifts, someone moves, and people are changed because of that movement. And yet, when it comes to faith in our current realities, we often behave as if holiness means staying still. As if maturity meant we have to find the right answers, holding them tight enough to squeeze out all the questions. But the story of God has been one of movement. So when I think about movement, I think about rivers. Just a few weeks ago, I went fishing. For those of you who know me, you should be shocked by that. I think the last time I picked up a fishing rod prior to a few weekends ago, it was 1996. And in the week, I just got to sit down and be by a river, the Stanislaus? Yeah, that one. Here's the thing about rivers. They don't hold still. They change with the seasons, swelling in the spring, narrowing in the summer, carving new paths through ancient stone. The power of a river isn't its stability, it's its flow. A river is alive precisely because it keeps moving. When it stops moving, a river ceases to be a river and soon becomes a swamp. I would like to proposition that perhaps faith is like that. Many of us grew up believing that faith was a set of beliefs or doctrines to be memorized, right? Some of us went through confirmation. Some of us, like me, grew up and we had a moment of a faith experience and we were baptized and they were kind of put into a different type of catechesis or learning. And we memorized statements and we defended those statements, and truths were to be protected from contamination. We were told that to doubt was dangerous, to question was rebellion, and to change our minds might actually be failure. But I think if we look closely at the scriptures, the story that we call sacred, we begin to discover that change isn't failure, that in fact it is often faithfulness. So the Bible, if you've been with me for a moment, the Bible is not one static idea about God. It was written approximately by 40 authors over roughly 1,500 to 1,600 years, composed of 66 plus books, depending on whether you're Protestant or not, and written in 3 languages across 3 continents. It's not that each one of those got it wrong, and then the next one got it right. Part of what the Bible shows us is the growth and movement of the people of God. We can see how people from Genesis understand God differently than people in the New Testament. We can begin to notice these movements of the people of God as we read this text and take it seriously as the stories in which we find ourselves in, but also the stories in which the people of God have found themselves in relationship to the divine. So in the book Red Skies, Roland Smith, one of the authors, tells a story about how Jesus once looked at the religious leaders of his day and he said, "You know how to read the weather, but you can't read the signs of the times. When it's evening, you say, 'It will be fair weather, for the sky is red.' And in the morning, 'It will be stormy today, for the sky is red and threatening.' You know how to interpret the appearance of the sky, but you cannot interpret the signs of the times." This is from Matthew 16. He was saying, look around. The skies are changing. The systems that once made sense are no longer holding in the same way. The winds are shifting, and you're clinging to yesterday's patterns as if they could stop the storm. I would argue that part of this journey for us is that we're living in red sky moments. Our world is changing. It's changing at a rate that I don't remember experiencing in my lifetime. Many of you have lived longer than I, and you may have moments where you remember as much change as what's happening right now, but I don't. And so we're living in this red sky moment. The climate's changing literally and spiritually. Church attendance across the West is declining. Young people are walking away from religious institutions at record numbers. And not because they've stopped believing in God, but because they can't find God in the narrow boxes that we've built. The studies show they deeply believe in God and in Jesus. They just don't believe in the church as an expression of that. Theologies of fear and domination are collapsing under their own weight, and some of them are growing under their own weight. And I would argue that maybe this isn't about the end of faith. Maybe it's the Spirit moving again in clear ways, as she always does, stirring us towards something new. Alan Hirsch calls these moments apocalyptic. Not because of destruction. Apocalyptic means revelatory, that these moments are apocalyptic because they're revealing something to us. It's an unveiling is apocalypse. So when the sky turns red, something's being revealed. Maybe what's being revealed is a new way for us to be in faith, a new way for the church to be faithful, a people less interested in defending doctrine and maybe more passionate about embodying love. Now, Paul got this before most of us, right? We read in his letters, be transformed by the renewing of your minds. Right? Transformation, not conformity. Renewal, not rigidity. This Greek word for transformation is metamorpho. It comes from the root of, the word metamorphosis comes from this Greek root. And it's what happens when a caterpillar devolves into primordial soup and comes out a butterfly. So to be a person of faith is, according to Paul, to live in constant metamorphosis. Change, right? This is what metamorphosis does. We're being changed. And a big piece of what's being changed in us is our minds. So if we close this off and say it can't be changed, what are we saying about our faith? What are we saying about what Christ might be calling us to, what the Spirit might be awakening in us? I don't know about you, but we don't hold a single moment of understanding forever. We live inside this ongoing relationship with the divine. In fact, even the word Trinity is this word parakoesis, this divine dance where we're being invited into this movement with God. God's own revelation of God's self is one of movement, of dancing. And that's what relationships do, right? They change us, we move. That's what love does. We don't love and stay the same. I'm a very different person than my wife married, whether she likes it or not. Right? She's a very different person than I am. We still have pieces, right? Like there are pieces of my old caterpillar self in my butterfly self today. But every time I crawl into a new cocoon and she crawls into a new cocoon, we have to learn some things about each other. Brian McLaren says that the Christian life is a movement of love and justice and transformation. Not a system, not an institution, not a set of doctrines, but a movement. The movement, the moment that we stop moving, stop questioning, stop growing, stop participating in the pulse of God is a moment that we have to ask ourselves some questions about where we are in our faith. One of my favorite processes of theologies of faith is open and relational theology. And one of the teachings of open and relational theology is God in God's self is not static or distant or unmoved. God's not a clock master that's been wound the universe and then walked away. That God is the pulse within creation itself, dynamic, responsive, alive with possibility, that as we move, God moves with us and in us and through us. So in every moment, God is calling creation forward, not coercively, but persuasively, wooing us in essence, inviting us to co-create a world more beautiful and more whole. Or as Paul says, you have been given the ministry of reconciliation. So to live by faith, then, is to live with this God in motion. Now, movements can feel like dying. Movement is not easy. As a kid who moved almost every 2 years until 6th grade, I can tell you the deaths that we experience in moving. Every act of migration involves loss. To move from one place to another means you're leaving something behind. I would go back and want to connect with those friends, but they had moved on. And I had too. So we leave something behind, a landscape, a certainty, a way of seeing. Every act of transformation involves a kenosis, right? Which is the idea of self-emptying. Every time we make one of these movements, there's a self-emptying that happens that comes with some loss. That's why I think Scripture takes place so much in the wilderness. It keeps bringing us back to the wilderness. The wilderness is where the old maps stop working. It's where your compass spins in circles. It's where the gods that you've built for yourself fall silent. And you have to decide if you're going to keep following that voice that called you to the wilderness in the first place. Now, when I think about those moments in my own life when the faith I inherited no longer fit, or when my theology began to feel too small for what I was experiencing, whether that was the vastness of grace I was discovering, or whether that was new relationships that my theology didn't make sense of. These boxes that I had built for God started bursting at their seams. And that wasn't easy. It's still not. A few weeks ago, my sister was here visiting. She lives in happiness in some of those boxes. They're home. They're comfortable. They're good for her. They're not good for me. Right? And there's some loss in that too, because the way that we used to relate in this box together, now I feel like a stranger to her, and I don't want to feel like a stranger to her. And I still get this box. I just can't live in it anymore and be faithful to God. This is the difficulty of the loss. I also remember that fear that everything was going to unravel, right? Like everybody played Jenga, the game with the blocks, and you stack them. That somehow when you get to that point where it's teetering and your kids are getting excited and you pull that block and everything collapses, I kept wondering when I was going to pull that block of faith and my entire faith was going to collapse. Would God be faithful in this unknown? Would God be faithful when that internal voice was saying, you're losing your faith, and yet the internal spirit was saying, keep pulling blocks. Stack them back up. Keep pulling them. So over time, I realized I wasn't losing it, but in fact, I was being invited to move, to migrate from one place to another, from fear to love, from certainty to mystery. And we'll be talking about those migrations over the next few weeks. So here's our opening question. That was a lot of preamble. Tell me about a time when your faith has outgrown its old maps. Right? Tell me about a time where you held this thing and then you started wondering, where do we go next? Because this isn't working. Anybody want to share?
I was getting a master's degree at Christian University after being a missionary for 16 years, and I started losing my faith. So I wasn't expecting that.
Yeah.
I would describe it very similar. I was taking pieces out, looking at them, and I wasn't intending to throw them away. I just wanted to understand them better.
Mm-hmm.
And then I found I'd taken so much apart, I wasn't sure I could put it back together. So.
Thank you, Dennis. If you didn't hear Dennis was a missionary in Turkey for a very long time and came back and did a master's degree in theology and was pulling those blocks out. And as he pulled them out and looked at them and saw that they didn't fit anymore, he was wondering, could he build it back together again? Anybody else? Yes.
Yeah, I have had a lot of those, but I think the most recent one was COVID, because suddenly we woke up Sunday morning and we couldn't go to church. And we discovered that you could get a whole lot better ministry and better music and everything else on Tuesday night in your pajamas. And that was a real crisis for both of us, because we had gone to church every Sunday morning for most of our lives. And it's been a process to try to figure out how important it is to actually be here.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you.
I think that was a crisis for a lot of people.
Yeah, no, one of the things I love about that is this is a crisis of praxis or practice. That part of the roots of our faith are the things that we do to live out our faith. And all of a sudden, one of those was pulled away. And the question became like, okay, what is the church? What's our relationship with this? What does community mean? How does this play? How do I want this in my life? I'll tell you as a pastor, I loved not going to church on a Sunday. I've been doing this since I was 18, and been going to church in utero, right? Like my world, and usually 3 days a week. And so the fact, like Mike and I would sit in our little huddle watching the stupid things we were filming with a couple other families in the church and have a glass of wine and be watching church and eating lunch while we're doing it, and was like, this might be better. I don't really know. Like, what does this mean? And then, the other side of it is for us, like Mike and I we were locked in this room. It used to be a studio, a giant pink studio. And we were locked in this room, now becoming a televangelist, which none of us wanted to be. And it honestly was a real crisis of faith, because it was like, if this is what this means, it's not who I am. And the other thing that I learned in that moment, pulling out, because I think this is such an important, often red sky moments or movement moments happen because of what's happening culturally, not just what's happening inside of us. That what I learned is that over the last few decades, that what the church had become was actually an entertainment company, and that was not what I wanted to do with my life, and it wasn't what I was called to. So what did it look like to pivot the church away from being an entertainment company into being a community of people gathered around Christ in meaningful ways to reach our neighbors with God's love? So I love, that's a really beautiful one that pops up so many things for us, I think. Others? Yeah, Sarah.
So I was raised in the church, and when I was younger, everything was very black and white. This is what the Bible said, everything was very literal. And then going off to college, being just around more different people, different experiences, their life story, their faith, their sexuality, all those things, and having to kind of pivot my theology to really focus on the love part, not the judgment part. It was like the old map was this childhood map of black and white, and then going out into the world and seeing the gray.
Yeah.
And grace and love.
Yeah, I love that. Do you remember when we first started getting GPS systems, and they would come on, your phone barely even worked, but you had a GPS system, and you would have to upload new maps because they hadn't loaded all the streets? That's what it feels like to me, right? It's like I had this map that I believed had all the streets, and then I was awakened to 1 billion more streets of the city, and I was like, what? What do we do with that? Yeah, that's a really, college and those experiences for us is another one of those milestone moments, right? That's another place where we feel red sky moments, is at milestones in our life. Yes?
Go that way. Is there even a road there?
Yeah, that way, and which is so biblical, right? They're like, when God talks to Abram at the time, he says, go to a place that I'm going to show you later. And he's like, okay. I'd have been like, nope, I'm not doing that. Like, what do we do, right? This is a part of that space. Yeah, I love that. Yes, Jenny.
I think my story is a little different in that wasn't raised in the church or didn't go to a particular church all the time. But my family that I came from was very Christian and taught us about prayer and to read the Bible and about healing and pray to be healed and just so many things. And then you get married and you leave the state. You go down to California where you don't have any relatives. And I had a big, big family of extended, cousins and aunts and uncles and 2 sets of grandparents and everything. And I'm down here, and I think after having our first child, I went, I can't do this all alone. That's what I felt. No family, no support, nobody who's going to think like I think. So that drove me to find a church family. And I checked out a certain denomination and then checked out another one. I went by what I knew of Chuck's background and then what my mom's background was, and that's how I ended up at St. Matthew. And I found exactly what I was looking for without knowing where to find it. And it's been a great place for me to evolve, grow, change, make lots of different, discoveries, I guess, in my faith. And it's been happening all along, and I've been here 50 years.
Yeah. Isn't
I
that...
just want to say a plug for St. Matthew.
I'll pay you after, yeah. And I think that's such a beautiful story, Jenny, because the moving away from what we know, right? Not necessarily because we've been wanted to, but we're married, we're figuring these things out, we're on this adventure, and then taking the risk of saying, I need this, I'm going to move toward it, right? Instead of just saying, well, I'm not going to, you took a risk, you moved toward it, you explored, you did these things, and that you kept exploring, that it created a space for you and an awakening for you where you've continued to explore. That's such a beautiful example, I think, of what the life of faith is meant to be in general, right? And I think sometimes we get stuck or we get static. And what do we do in those moments? How do we find movement when we don't have it? Yeah. Yes, Marty? You had your hand up, yes? Okay, good.
Because I was thinking in terms of the whole church
Mm-hmm.
and how this church has changed. How those of us who've been here 50 years remember Wagner Center and candlelit services and a whole different kind of music and worship and rules and things that we did and things that we were taught. Although all through it we've had this total sense of grace and community.
Mm-hmm.
And that is what has held us together, even though, this is totally different. This used to be the
Yeah. Yeah, no, I love that. And as the church as a model for movement is, and to say to you all how blessed you've been to be in a church that moves, right? Because I've been in a lot that don't, that have never made that hard step of the next thing and the next thing, and yet remained centered in Christ, right? Which is just a beautiful, metaphor for how our own lives are meant to be. Just because we're moving doesn't mean we're not centered in the one who centers us. We can still be, my buddy Ryan, who I talk about a lot from Texas, there was a night where we were at this conference in Atlanta, and we had heard a lot of crazy faith things. And for me, it was invigorating. For him, it was fear-evoking. And he said, Rustin, you cannot pull one more of my blocks. And I didn't even know I was pulling his blocks. And then we had this conversation of, oh man, I get it. Just because I'm at this place in this moment and this has meaning for me, this feels really dangerous to you. And how do we do this together, right? And live in this space. That's a part of this journey too. So when faith stops moving, often it calcifies into fear. We start protecting our institutions rather than people. We start defending ideas rather than embodying grace. We start worshiping the past instead of partnering with God's future. You often hear, well, back when the glory days were here. And the tragedy is that often we do this in the name of God. But Jesus is still whispering, follow me. Notice that he doesn't say, there we go. Notice that he doesn't say, agree with me. He doesn't say, believe perfectly about me. He says, follow me. Come and find out, right? We're doing this journey together. Just follow me. Follow me in the streets. Follow me into the wounds. Follow me into new life. Follow, walk, move. This is the movement of the Spirit, and this is the rhythm of resurrection, right? This is the core part of our theology, that we are consistently being resurrected in Christ, that we're being made new all the time. We're shedding old skin. Whatever metaphor you want to use, Paul uses them all in the midst of his writings. So over the next 3 weeks, we're going to be exploring this movement together. We'll call it our migration table. And so we're going to talk about old frameworks, and we're going to talk about frameworks that we might be migrating toward. Some of them may feel really crazy to you. Some of them may not feel crazy enough. And as we conclude tonight in a little bit, one of the questions that I have is, what are the migrations you want to talk about? Because I have in my head these kind of some core migrations that we're going to talk about, but we can change all that, right? Based on where you're feeling some migrations happen in your life, or where you see migrations happening in our world, and wonder what we should be doing with this so that we can explore these things together. So in week 2, we're going to be talking about a spiritual migration. We're going to look at what does it mean for us to journey from things like certainty to mystery, right? The spiritual migrations for me are the things that when they happen, they kind of change everything. Like I can have a theological migration and you may not even know. But when I'm talking about the spiritual migrations, I'm talking about things like, this has really shifted how I understand everything else that's to come.
Can you give us an example of that?
Yeah, so from certainty to mystery.
But I mean...
Yeah, I'm going to unpack all these, for sure. I'm not going to give you a bunch of examples tonight, because I'm telling you where we're going, and then we're going to go there. Another one is from fear to freedom, right? A lot of us were handed theological systems of fear. They were meant to be put in place to control us. And this is what you have to believe. This is the root of fundamentalism. Both liberal fundamentalism and conservative fundamentalism are built to create cells with which we are imprisoned of these things have to be true or nothing else works. And so those are fear paradigms. So what does it look like to move from a fear paradigm to a freedom paradigm? How does that move us? That shifts us. Another one is a movement from dualistic ways of thinking to non-dualistic ways of thinking. That's a big word. We're going to unpack what that means. Part of that is we've been handed systems in our world that says everything is black or white. But Jesus does not function in that way. 99.9% of the time, Jesus says, oh, you've given me a dualistic frame. I'm going to do the third way. I'm going to do the thing that isn't even in your line. Like, here's this line, and I'm doing this. Do you want to join me? That's non-dualistic thinking. Yet our church, not our church, but the church, Big C Church, has built itself often around frames of dualism. And so what does it look like? How does our spirituality, how does our full journey change by adopting a non-dualistic way of thinking? So there'll be a lot of those. Those are just 3 examples. Week 3, we're going to explore like theological migration. So when I think about theological migrations, think about like systematic theology. In systematic theology, there are like things like Christology, which is the study of Christ, and there is ecclesiology, which is the study of the church, and there is soteriology, and there is all these ologies, right? We're going to talk about what happens when some of those change, that we're being called into that space. So like God, like when our idea of God moves from, this is one that happens generally for children as they're moving into college, right? God is Zeus, even though we didn't teach that, right? God is Zeus who throws lightning bolts at us when we do wrong, and we don't get the parking spot because we did wrong things, and we live in that way. I've talked about this before, but like when I was a high schooler playing tennis, I used to think that how well I would do the next day was about how I lived the night before. And my game of tennis was a game of confession. Like, oh God, I'm so sorry for that thing that I did. Help me play better, right? Like I believed that somehow that was how God engaged with me. And then I moved to this God of love that if God is love, then everything else changes. If this is the embodiment of who God is, then it changes. And here's what changes post that. So that's an example of the God one. Scripture, like our idea of Scripture changes. Salvation, what we're being saved for or to or from shifts. How we understand sin, how we understand the church itself. That's what we're going to talk about in week 3, which you can already tell that this is going to be hard. And then week 4, we're going to bring about and talk about the missional migration. So how we live out this movement in the world, things like justice and liberation and like concepts like the wounded healer and what does that mean in our space and what does it mean to co-create with God and these kind of spaces of action-oriented. Our theology should also be action-oriented, but we're really going to focus on practice, like how we practice these things out. So the point of this is, this is not just a lecture series, right? This is an invitation for us to explore and to bring our own things and to think about what we need to talk about, of where we're seeing movements in our own life. And maybe some of you are feeling movements in this spot and you actually are looking for language about what's happening in this moment and where are we at. Great, let's talk about that, right? Let's have a conversation and we'll get to centering those conversations. It's a space to wonder and to wrestle and to let go and to lean in, to imagine that perhaps God isn't finished yet with the church, with our world, or with you and I. So, sorry, I should have clicked that. These are certainty to mystery, dualism, non-dualism, God as monarch to God as relational presence, Bible as rule book, Bible as conversation, sin as rule breaking, sin as relational fracture, salvation as escape, salvation as reconciliation. Now, what's interesting about this is it's dualistic. So I'm going to push us away from the dualism of how we talk about this, that when, like frequently in theological circles, they'll lay out salvation as escape, and then somebody else will lay out as salvation as reconciliation, but there's actually about 200 varieties between that space. Exactly. That's why I tried to show it as non-dualistic, but it's still on lines on the end. So I was like, I didn't have enough room to put a dot above, and so we'll go with that. So let's talk about for a moment let's go to the second question first. Your questions are different than mine. Hold on. Where has God most recently invited you to move? It's getting hot in here, huh? Yeah.
Well, like
Oh,
a
yeah.
year ago, I didn't think I would ever be going to a church again.
Mm.
I haven't been in church for a decade, so that seems like a big change.
It is a big move.
Right.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that, Yulia.
And that's partly because of the math question.
Mm.
It's like, except what, it's not like I felt like I had outgrown the math, but the math flipped. That's all to do with how political church has become the last 10 years and how I'm feeling. And I feel like the math can't change completely. Good is bad and bad is good and north is south. And it's like I didn't recognize Christ in the church anymore.
Yeah.
And I had trouble before, but I can kind of still do it. But over the last 10 years, I just can't recognize it. I don't see it. I kind of go take my little GPS dot and
Yeah.
walk off map.
That's,
Yeah.
I love that image of walk
But
off
I do
map.
recognize it here, and so it's like, okay, I didn't think a year ago that I
Yeah.
would have any interest.
Thank you. Yeah. Yes, Connie.
Well, what I've thought about is our country is so divided in so many ways, and there are certain series about telling us little steps that we can do to try and make it easier for us. Like, talk to somebody who doesn't believe the same as you do and try and find common ground. And so what I'm looking at is, what more can I do? What should I not do to keep this going, where I can try and not change anyone's mind, or not change my mind particularly, but just to have the conversations that you talk about in church so that we can get along better.
Thank you. Yeah, what is it? What does it mean to center first in love of each other and see what comes next versus centering in our difference, right?
Yeah, we've been on that series for a while, and
Yeah.
different approaches, and it's really, hit a note with me, and then with this question about, what do I need to do, and what do I need to step back from?
Yeah, thank you. Yes, yeah.
I don't know if God's ever asked me to move. I don't know if I've been invited. Though when you get old, you look back in your life and you see where God's moved you. That's different from me deciding that.
Mm-hmm.
And every morning I thank Him for where He's taken me, where He's moved me. The concept of walking in His footsteps, in His sandals. There's only one way home. It's up Northgate Road and turn left after a mile. But there's a lot of things that happen in that road up that mile. 55 years going up that road.
Yeah.
That, we've been going to a bunch of reunions from old students from 1969 and 70.
Just yesterday.
And wow. That just is life-changing to see them as old as me, practically. I just started teaching when they were there. But to hear their life stories and hear their stories of where we intersected, and them asking me or telling me, I went up Northgate Road and we had breakfast, the whole class. The things that they remember. I remember those things, but they're not things that I was invited to do. God just did them through me. So, I don't know if that makes sense.
It does, and because I don't think God moves the same way with all of us, right? God didn't, like I think about just in the fathers and sons. God said to Abraham, I'm going to take you to a place, follow me to a place that you don't know yet. Jacob, right, just 2 generations later, tried to cheat his brother out of a thing, and his own stubborn nature, like it took him wrestling with God on the side of the Jabbok to have a movement. And yet he had been moving that whole way, right? And God had been with him that whole way. I'm not saying that you're stubborn and so God just moved you anyway, but maybe that's the reality, right? And you and I are very similar. Like I look back at my life and I see, like if you would have asked me as an 18-year-old pastor of a Chinese Baptist church in North Oklahoma City, if I would be living in California, working in a Lutheran church, and be so liberal compared to that kid that I wouldn't even know who he is, I would have told you we're smoking crack. Right? Yeah. And that's like, but that's where God brought me here. I didn't, and I look at moments where I did have some choice. I mean, one of the places in my life that I go back to regularly where I heard God's voice as clear as day. I was graduated from college, about 2 weeks away from graduating from college, and I had doing the Baptist Peace Corps, which was called USC2, and I was in Alpharetta, Georgia, and this guy I didn't even know came in and gave me a list of 100 places that I could choose from to spend the next 2 years of my life. And I had until the afternoon at 2 o'clock to discern God's will for my 18-year-old life of where God would have me to be. And I needed to narrow it down to 3, and I may or may not get one of those 3. And I sat beside that lake, and I was like, God, if I get this wrong, everything is over. Like, if I miss your will, what do you mean? And as clear as day, God said to me, Rustin, it doesn't matter where you go. It matters if you're with me. And if you're with me, everywhere you go is good. And I exhaled, and I put the 3 places that I would like to live. New York City, Boston, Massachusetts, and Colorado running a whitewater rafting ministry. Ended up in Boston and loved every moment of it, and spent 10 years, met my wife there, all of these things, right? Like, it was that moment that triggered the next moment. And it's all different. Like, God hasn't always interacted with me in the same way. I spent a long period of my life not hearing God's verbal voice ever again. And what does it mean to be faithful when that was your norm and now it's not there? What do you do, right? Like, how do I hear God? What does that look like? How do I discern what's what and what's not? These are big things. Anybody else?
Yes, let's see. I too, I don't think of this as an invite and it being invited, but I feel like I've been stretched in very practical situations where caring for the least of these has become a reality in my life. And a reality that I struggle with and yet can feel God nudging me into really thinking through what does that look like to honestly reach out in love to someone who's very needy.
Yeah.
That's kind of a new thing. New in terms of it actually affecting.
Yeah. You've done that your whole life, and yet it's having a new effect. Which I love, right? Because the other beautiful piece of that I think is a good faith reminder is just because we've experienced one way, like service has been a core part of who you are, and yet now God's speaking to you through that thing in a new way. And you're like, what are you doing? What does this mean?
It's that stretching idea, and also theologically, just being so convicted of the fact that God is the creator, so he's not going to let me just plateau out and not continually create new things, new experiences, and new attitudes, and all the things that come with creation. And I think in terms of the theme of this class, being asked to go into new places and new experiences, for me theologically, it's expanded my view of who God is and where he's at work. I used to be able to know exactly.
Yeah.
I know where God is. He's with this group of people that will believe this.
Yeah.
And that's where, but he's not out there in the world.
Yeah.
Worldliness.
Yeah.
It's always a bad thing.
I didn't know she picked me because I was one of the least
She's been the one moving you this whole time. You've been wondering where that's been happening. It's been Lynn silently in the middle of the night shoving you down. Yeah.
Well, that's true.
Anybody else?
I think
Yeah.
my whole formative life experience when I was younger was a lot of I can relate to what you're saying, the black and white, and if you are a faithful Christ follower, then your job is to spend your life pursuing truth with a capital T, and that there was, one truth, one way to see that truth, and if you don't see it that way, then you just haven't pursued it enough or well enough. And that created in me a lot of feelings of not being enough, not being, because I didn't come to the same conclusions as
Those around you.
those around me. And so then it's just been so freeing to feel invited by God to move to a space where I can hold that mystery and have it be okay that I really don't know that black and white answer to that question, or I don't have to come to some conclusion about every person, every belief, every meaning of every scripture passage. I just don't have to have it all wired. And that's,
Yeah.
it's a good kind of movement for me.
I don't think with you and your background, I'm thinking of my daughter now who's an artist. In the art world, things have changed a lot. It all starts out with a pen, a pencil, or maybe a pen on a white piece of paper. It's black and white.
If you're going to try to convince me that black and white is where I'm supposed to be, you're in the wrong seat, buddy.
But it starts there.
Yeah. So here,
She takes that black and white drawing and she puts it on the computer and fills it in with color. She can even erase a little bit here and there. Then she fills it in with color.
yes.
And that's where I don't want, my history of the black and white
It's beautiful.
is really important.
100% important.
Foundation.
Yes.
And then God
Yes.
takes and colors me in.
Yes. 100%. Right? Part of what makes it feel like dying is because it was beloved. And so there's a teaching called spiral dynamics, and don't go down that rabbit hole for your life. It is not worth it unless you have a lot of time. This is the one thing that I learned from spiral dynamics that changed my life. It's this idea that we're in this movement and we're progressing as a people, and you move from color to color. One of the teachings of spiral dynamics is when you move to the next tier of life, you look back at the previous tier with judgment. But when you move to the next tier beyond that, you look back with gratitude. Right? So often we come into this faith journey and we've moved from to the next place, right? Wherever God's moved us. And we look back and we're like, man, those people suck. And those people ruined my life. And man, I was in prison. And then you take one more step and you're like, man, the foundation of the faith that set for me has given me room to run. And that's beautiful, right? That is beautiful. But I would also argue that doesn't mean that I have to teach my kid to live in that black and white. I can teach my kid to live in the purple and green and blue and orange, and that's where he starts. He doesn't have to go back to the place where I began. He'll have his own starting place. And my job as a faith leader or a parent is to not pass on my junk, but to give people, to start in the grace. And then where do you color from? Man, I can't wait to see the beauty of the places. And you see this, one of the conversations these three were having as they were coming in was the experience of teachers. By the way, we have the teacher of the year last year in the room with us. Sarah got teacher of the year for the California, right? Like all over. No. This area. So like part of what happens with teachers, right, is you teach these kids these things and then they come back and they're like, man, you changed my life. And you're like, I didn't even like you. Right? I didn't even like you. You were the annoying kid and I changed your life. Beautiful, man. You were allowing God to flow through you in a beautiful way, and that's lovely. This is a part of this. This is part of the journey we're in, right? And that is lovely and beautiful and good. So, what about the way it says on here? What a belief or assumption might you need to migrate so that love can grow? Let's broaden it. What belief or practice or assumption that you might be holding right now, are you thinking might be sparking for you? Of like, man, I need to ask a question about that. Is there anything that pops to your mind?
I see this migration as starting from a place of, this is my anchor. And I walk with God, take in what he shows me, but I'm always connected to that anchor, the gospel. And I don't want to migrate so far that I can't see that in the rearview mirror. So you tell me, is that an aberrant belief system, or?
No, I think so I'm asking this question because I'm going to write down some questions. I think a great question is can I migrate myself out of this faith journey thing, right? Like, and I know that's not the question you're asking. You're asking like, I don't think it's aberrant at all. Let me first say that. I think often one of the fears that we hold, or anxieties, not to make it as much as a fear, one of the anxieties we hold is, have I gone too far, right? One of the questions Ryan's always asked me is, how far is too far when you talk about the love of God or the grace of God? So I think it's a really interesting question to ask ourselves. Can we migrate in a way that is negative?
Yeah, you talked about your journey in marriage,
Mm-hmm.
and that you're both changing, but you've got wedding vows that you look back to and say, that's the bedrock of this thing. So I see that as similar to my faith journey.
Yeah, and I also wonder what it looks like when all that falls apart. And not because of necessarily bad things, but because we've become different. And now what if my vows need to shift? And I've moved from a place of these static things that we promised together when we were 22 and 23. We weren't. We were 28 and however old Heather is. 28 and 26 or 5, whatever she was. And now we need a whole new set of vows. Or we can't do this thing. I mean, Heather and I have had moments where we've had to say, like, either some things change or we have to ask some hard questions about our future, because the same vows that got us here are not going to be the same vows that take us to the next space. I have friends who were married at 20 and 21, they were kids when they made the commitments that they made to each other. And I think that same, it rolls in my head the same way. Like, when I first heard the call of God in my life in a way that I was capable of receiving it, I was 7 years old, and it was so simple, right? It was so simple that God loved me and wanted me to come forward and receive that love from him. And then a couple years later, it was like, well, do I love God back? I know God loves me, but what does that look like? And then I became a teenager, and everything in my life and inside of me was changing, and developmentally and puberty and all these things. And I'm like, am I still here? And I can look back and I can point places where God was, even in times where I didn't feel like God was there, right? That the looking back on our faith is such a powerful spiritual practice, because I can look back and I can say, oh God, I saw you in this person, I saw you in that person, I saw that you were here with me in this darkness, but I couldn't have done it in it. In fact, I tried and felt very alone and very isolated. And so I guess my response to that is, how do we hold both of these things, right? And you're going to hear me say this a lot. Like, how do we hold the complexity of the marriage metaphor in the complexity of what happens when it breaks down? What do we do with that? How do we live into that? How do we change? How does, there are certain relationships where people run off, right? And they seek a new love. And I don't know about you, but I've done that in my relationship with God a plethora of times. And we have examples of like Hosea and Gomer to root that in our faith of God pursuing us. And so, I hold that balance. Like, how do we hold the complexity of that? And yes, like, do I want to be rooted in the gospel? Yeah. Like, I hope that there are some pens in the map that we can place to help us engage that. Yeah, Derek.
I feel like I want to address your question. And what I'm thinking about is, you're probably familiar with like the 12 steps, or at least like 3 of them. I'm not sure I know all 12. But, like the first one is, we've come to a place where we realize that our life is out of control, and that we need help, and then there's something about like God as we understand God. And that's kind of different than like, maybe it's what we mean by it, but if the gospel is like, you feel like, well, what is the gospel? And it's like an understanding. You can't hold on to that, you can just hold on to God, who I can't even name right now, and there could be times where, like you were talking about, how there was times where you used to hear from God in a certain way, and then that doesn't work anymore, or there's times where I would think this is how I pray, and I couldn't do that. Or I'd think like, this is how I understood the Bible, and like, that's not working for me. Or I talked with my son, and he was saying like, I believe in science, so can I be a Christian? And I was kind of like saying to him like, it's about like it's okay to doubt, it's okay to be lost, as long as, like, we're not lost to God. We just don't know where we are. And you can kind of hold on to that, like, I don't know what I'm holding on to, but I'm still holding on. Not even sure that you exist, but I'm holding on anyway, and like that kind of thing. And also, this is sort of sad, but I was always told, like, there's also a scripture that goes with this, that nothing will ever happen to you that's so hard that you can't get over it. And luckily to me, nothing so hard has ever happened to me, but I think for a lot of people, like you were asking, like, can we get lost? And
Yeah.
I think maybe, yeah, you can.
Yeah.
There can be things that just break you and then you're dead.
Yeah.
I wish that wasn't true.
No, and I think it's a really beautiful thing to say to as we close, right? Is that if you're looking for me to give you in this journey over the next 4 weeks, here are the maps that are never going to fail you. It's not going to happen. And if you've been with any of these classes, you know it's not going to happen because that's not how I work. But also like, but what you are going to hear me say is that you might be lost from God, but God is never lost from you. And hold on. I think there's times when being lost is so scary, debilitating. And there are times where that then moves into, wait, this being lost is fun, right? Like, I've been in places in Europe where I was very scared when I got lost because I was in the wrong place. And then you turn a corner down the road and you're like, oh my God, I just walked into a giant parade in the middle of Rome and they're carrying giant Marys and now I'm in this crazy experience and all of a sudden that lost piece of fear is left because I'm in a new thing, right? And so part of what you will hear me say is you might be lost from God, but that doesn't mean you're lost. God hasn't lost you. And, hold on one sec, God hasn't lost you. And it's not done, right? Like, we're not done. Keep moving, right? Keep moving.
I just wanted to say, for all these things that everybody's saying, to me, when you go through your transitioning and changing how you see things, how you know God, then one of the wonderful things you know when you get to another level is that thing about where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. And the feeling you get is freedom. Oh, I get it now. You got past the feeling judged all the time, or you did it wrong, or you feel ashamed, or you shouldn't have, or whatever. And you get to a different level where you realize how much God loves you no matter what. Or that you're not lost because, like you said, you came around the corner and there you were. There he was, there God is. So I just think that one of the signs of that you get every once in a while is the sense of a new freedom. A freedom in the love of God. A freedom in your relationship.
Yeah. And what I want to hold, and I'm going to challenge us to hold this, is that and sometimes being lost is really scary. And it feels like everything is gone. And there's not a simple answer for that. And to offer one is the route of foolishness. Read the text of Job. So how do we live into that, right? How do we hold the balance that I might be, my blue dot might have taken me off the map. And not to look at those people that the blue dot has taken them off the map with judgment. But to look at them with curiosity. Or people their screen is saying, I can't find Wi-Fi. Right? I can't find Wi-Fi, I can't find Wi-Fi. Or you're stuck in the proverbial, take a right turn, take a right turn. Make a U-turn when available. Make a U-turn when available. Right? We've all been there, but we've also been there in our faith. And so how do we hold this? What do we do in that space? So, as we come to the end of tonight's first session, I want to invite you to slow your breathing for a moment, to notice your own movement, the rise and fall of your lungs, the pulse of life that beats beneath your skin. And even here, sitting still, we are not motionless. Our cells are moving. Our hearts are moving. The earth beneath us is spinning. We're part of a creation that never stops changing and unfolding and becoming. And that is the same truth at the center of our faith story. God is not frozen in time. God is not the still point at the edge of the universe watching history roll by. God is the heartbeat pulsing through all of it. The one who moves in love, with love, toward love. We spent the night exploring the idea that faith, when it's alive, migrates, it grows, it transforms, it reformats our assumptions, it rewrites our stories, and it stretches our imaginations. So if we take Scripture seriously, movement is woven into the DNA of the people of God. When Abraham leaves home, when Moses leads people out of bondage, when the Spirit descends at Pentecost, each movement begins with motion. Something shifts and something awakens. The same God who called them out of their comfort also calls us out of ours. Out of settled beliefs, out of certainties, out of this is how it's always been, and into a wild and untamed landscape of love. So the journey of faith then is not about guarding what we once knew. It's about trusting that there is always more to know. That mystery is always unfolding. There's more to become, more to love. To be a follower of Jesus is to keep following and walking. And that can be disorienting. Because movement means leaving something behind. An idea, a fear, a version of God that once sustained us but no longer fits. And that's what spiritual growth sometimes feels like, loss. But loss can also be grace in disguise. Because in losing what no longer holds life, we can make room for what does. And we become available to God's next invitation. The mystics called this the dance of the Spirit, a rhythm of letting go and leaning in, or as Henry Nouwen wrote, we are called to be not the defenders of God, but the witnesses to God's ongoing creation. That's what we're doing. We're learning to witness the God who is still creating in us. So maybe the question we leave tonight is this: where might the Spirit be moving me? What part of my faith feels restless, ready to migrate towards something truer, freer, more loving? And I'm not going to be able to answer that for you any of these weeks. But I can promise you this: God moves with you and God has gone before you, always. God doesn't stay behind in your certainty, waving goodbye from the shore. God walks beside you into the mystery. He's not worried about you losing it. Don't be afraid. I'm already here, he says. So this movement of faith is not about abandoning what was beautiful in the past. It's about letting love keep leading us forward into new beauty. It's about trusting that the resurrection is still happening at all moments. That new life is always being born, even out of endings. So take a deep breath. Feel the movement of grace. The holy wind that has carried our ancestors now carries us. So God of movement and mystery, you are always ahead of us, calling us into wide open spaces of your love. When we cling too tightly, loosen our grip. When we fear the unknown, remind us that you are already there. When we grow weary from the journey, wrap us in the rhythms of your grace. May we not confuse certainty with faith or comfort with calling. Move us again and again until our hearts beat in the rhythm of yours. So go now in the spirit of the one who moves through all things, the Christ who walks beside us, and the God whose love will not be still. Amen.